Hi, everybody. My name is Richard L'Esperance, and I go by the name of my man Richard. Welcome to a better lifestyle. Today we're gonna talk about being different. So uh, I have a guest who knows who walked in that path. So he knows very well what being different means. Yes, so welcome to a better lifestyle. My guest today is Roy Osing, and I think you guys are gonna benefit from that episode. So please, Roy, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your story, and we'll get started.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, by the way. I really appreciate it. Delighted to be here. My story is all about, I guess, realizing at a very young age that success, as I looked around me, was very much related to this whole concept of being different in a way that people cared about. Not just being different for the sake of being different. That's narcissism 101. That's not what I'm talking about. What I landed on was success, whether it was from a business point of view or a life point of view or a career point of view, was about figuring out how to stand out and be different in a way that mattered to other people. Okay. It occurred to me really, really young that that was important. And I've spent literally 40 years practicing that in business, where I had the opportunity to lead a data and internet company, and we grew the business to $1 billion in annual sales. So worked really, really, really well. And yeah, so my mantra is be different or be dead. And all that says is if you can't find a way to be different in a way people care about, then you're in for a real hard road. And from a business point of view, there's all sorts of examples of businesses that have gone out of business because they simply weren't able to differentiate themselves. And so my story is about basically learning more about this whole concept and applying it in a startup where we were able to grow it to 1 billion. And now I'm not doing that anymore. I'm sharing what worked for me with audiences such as yours, and in the hopes that some of the ideas will resonate with people and it'll help them. So I'm trying to give back.
Okay. So speaking of what worked for you, so what are some experiences that you've encountered in regards to that topic?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that you learn really early is that there's no silver bullets. There's no one thing that actually can drive success, and it's what I try and express to people, that it's a whole bunch of little simple things working together seamlessly that actually enables what I would call superlative performance and extraordinary growth. And let me give you a couple of examples. Like, it occurred to me that I needed to reinvent how I looked at strategic planning in my business. So I land in a startup, I look around, and none of the traditional strategic planning processes would work for me. They were too long, they were too cumbersome, they were too expensive, and I needed something that would allow me to get executing quickly so that I could get a ramp up on revenues. And so I created what I called the strategic game planning process that is really simple. It's built to execute, if I can call it that. And you can literally create a plan for your business in 48 hours. And I work with clients all the time. We get in a room with their leadership team, and in 48 hours, we've actually got a plan that can be executed. You know, like most planning processes spend way too much time, in my view, trying to get the plan perfect in a world that is imperfect. Help me understand why that even makes sense, right? You can't make perfect that which is imperfect. And yet so many processes are geared to actually try and do that. Well, what you end up doing is you just burn time, burn resources, and really don't accomplish anything. And so my process is really simple. It consists of answering 3 questions. And if you can do that, and you can, then you'll have a game plan. And so the first question is, how big do you want to be? And that's a question about growth, revenue growth. Where do you want to be in 24 months? So it's not a 5-year view, it's a 24-month view. So if you're at $1 million, do you want to be at 5? Do you want to be at 10? Do you want to be at 2? It's important to answer that question first, because the number drives the risk and the character of your strategy. So we spend a lot of time on that. Then we say, well, where are you going to get the money from? And that the question that backs that up is, who do you want to serve? This is a really important part of the process that I find traditional planning doesn't really get into enough detail. Because really you want to select customer groups that have the latent potential to drive the revenues, right, that you're trying to get. And so we spend an awful lot of time on that. And then we go into the third question, which is how you're going to compete and win. And this is about the be different issue. It's about how you're going to differentiate yourself in a way that makes sense to the customers that you've chosen to serve. And that's it. We create a plan around those three statements, three questions, and then we just start to execute it. That probably was the most important sort of breakthrough move that I made when I took over this business, because everybody was locked into traditional stuff, which really didn't yield execution. And so it taught me that you need to execute imperfection real fast and learn from it and just keep moving. If you're pondering too much, you're not doing anything and you can't move the yardstick. So that's an example of something that worked really well for me. And to this day, I'm the only one that actually teaches planning this way, which is kind of ridiculous, really, when you think about it. There should be more people doing different things as it relates to planning, but they're not.
Do you have another example in mind?
Yeah. So I'm an execution performance guy. If you can't execute it to drive performance, we shouldn't be doing it. So I'm looking for simple little things as a leader that lit fires in people, captured their imagination, and would get them, doing things differently to move forward. And one of the things that I introduced was a concept called cleansing the internal environment. Now, that was all about getting rid of the crap and the grunge and the bureaucracy and the rules that don't make any sense to customers inside the organization. Because if you could cleanse the environment of that, then you would get better performance. And so the Killing the Dumb Rules program was one that we had a lot of fun with. And I basically said to people, and this was a 10,000 person organization, so it was a large team that we eventually built it to. The objective was to seek out and get rid of the rules that didn't make any sense to customers. Pretty logical, right? I mean, if customers are dealing with a rule system that infuriates them, then it's highly unlikely they're going to keep doing business with you. So we introduced this. I would show up in the workplace with a white T-shirt with dumb rules written on it and a big X through it, and we would have contests in terms of who could identify and get rid of the stupidest rule we had as a company. And I mean, I took a lot of flack from my executive colleagues who said, well, why are you admitting we're doing stupid things? And I would say, well, because we are doing stupid things. And if we were able to change that, we could really improve performance. And so as an idea, it's a simple little concept, but you would not believe the power that had in terms of improving performance. And there's all sorts of little things like that I did that people love to do. And yeah, I mean, we stepped the revenue line up considerably. And it's hard for some people to really understand how those little things could make such a big difference. And what people fail to realize, it's not what's on paper. It's what's in people's heart. And if you can light that fire with however you can do it with something that really excites them, their performance level goes right through the roof. And as a result, in our case, revenues followed suit. Now, interestingly, people would look at what we were doing and they'd go, well, how can that work? I mean, how can getting rid of dumb rules really work? Well, the problem is they thought that the rule system was perfect and they didn't want to admit that it wasn't. And so they had shut their mind off to the possibilities that what you could do with a rule system that enabled people to do business with you as opposed to control them, the power that had in terms of generating extra revenues. So those are two little examples. I mean, we could probably spend a show on on each one of them because there's a bunch more. So it depends on how much time we have this morning, you see.
Is there such thing as being too different?
No, and I'll tell you why. The process, the interesting question, because the other day somebody said to me, well, is it possible? I mean, you're really going to get if you try and be different, people get a lot of pushback, right? And I say, well, no, not if it's done right. Okay, don't forget, my model of being different is not just being different for the sake of being different, right? It's not about the color of your hair. It's not about your sexual preferences. It's not about what pronoun you want, okay? And yet a lot of people will say that they're different because of that. It's figuring out what in this case, if you're in business, what your customer target, what they care about, and satisfying what they care about in a way that nobody else does. You can never be too different doing that. Ever, okay? So again, you have to understand the definition of being different. It's doing something uniquely that satisfies what other people care about. So it's a way of serving others in a way that nobody else does. And as long as you're doing that, you can never be too different. I'll tell you why, because they change and you need to change along with that. So your definition of uniqueness, okay, has to change as they change, as what they care about change. And I sometimes refer to it as what they crave change. It's not about what people need. It's about what people crave. And so being different is playing into that craving set in a way that nobody else does. I created a little tactic, which I call the only statement. Like, too many people out there claim that they're better, they're best, they're number one, they're leaders, right? You've heard that, you've read it on websites. Everybody claims to be better. The problem, I call that claptrap, because it's meaningless. To customers, when you say you're best, that's a meaningless statement, because it's best in whose eyes? Who defines best? How's it measured, etc.? So meaningless claims, okay? So I had to come up with something that actually cut through all that clutter and expressed our uniqueness in a way that people could see and they could understand and they could actually see it in action. And so I created this thing called the only statement. And so no, you can never be too different. And let me tell you why. The process is really quite simple. Once you've identified the customers that you want to serve and understand what they care about, your objective is to play into that, okay, and figure out how you can uniquely provide what they care about. You can never be too different. The other thing in that respect, because they're always going to appreciate the fact that you're unique in something that they care about, that knows no bounds in terms of what you can do. The other thing I would have to say is what they care about changes over time. So you need to be nimble and you need to be willing to adapt to how they change. And so that's going to force you to be different all the time. So think about it this way. Your be different definition is a draft. It's always a draft. You're always going to have to change it, because to believe that it's going to last for 10 years is tantamount to saying that you don't believe the world will change in 10 years. And we know how silly of a notion that is.
Before, you were saying that people could get pushbacks from being different. How does one deal with the criticism and all that?
Well, I think what I was saying is that I was asked the question, can you ever be too different? And my answer was never. Okay, you could never be, you're never, or you're not going to get any pushback. As long as you are satisfying what people care about in a unique way, they will always love you for that. You'll get pushback if you force your view of yourself, okay, onto your customer. All right. And that's what I would call a narcissistic view of trying to be different. It's not about that. Okay. It's not about the color of your hair. It's not about you and I, whether we have it or not. It's It's not about your pronouns. It's about what are you doing to satisfy what people care about in a way that only you do. And as long as you're focused on that, you can never be too different and you won't get any pushback. You may get pushback from people who are looking at you going, oh, gee, why are you doing that silly stuff? Right? Because they don't understand it. And that's not pushback. That's corroboration of the fact you're doing the right thing, in my view. So no, don't be afraid of being different if you're doing it the right way. I've written an awful lot about this on my website and that. So when somebody marches down this journey, you take the blinders off. You're not looking at yourself. You're looking at what people care, other people care about, trying to find a unique way of actually satisfying that. So in a way, you can think about it as it's a kind of like a serving modus operandi that you're in right now. And that is always pure. It's never too much. It'll never get you pushed back if you're doing it the right way.
How important it is, like for companies or individual who work for themselves or professional to think of outside of the box from time to time.
Well, yeah, I would say the challenge is not necessarily to think out of the box, is to create a new box to play in. Okay. In other words, like I'm a fan of discontinuity, creating discontinuities. So a discontinuity will end up creating an opportunity for you. Okay, such as what I found when I started playing around with the only statement. It actually opened up a huge opportunity for people that were struggling with how to differentiate themselves. Because quite honestly, and I'll be really tough on businesses. I don't think businesses do a very good job today of differentiating. They continue to do it the same old way. We're better, we're best. We provide the best customer service. We're market leaders in the provision of IP technology. Look, that's their view of who they are. And when you come up with a kind of like a breakthrough, groundbreaking notion of an only statement, which is binary, it either exists or it doesn't, it can be observed, it can be measured, that opened a ton of opportunity, not just for me, but for the clients who chose to adopt it, right? It opened up opportunities for them because the ability for them to differentiate in a highly competitive environment went up, and their performance went up, and their success went up.
So what about fear, like stepping out and doing something new? So that can be fearful.
Absolutely. I mean, and you know what? In a way, it's because we've been taught to not take risks. I mean, just look at risk management in any organization. Why do they exist? They exist to try and mitigate risk. How can you mitigate risk in an environment that changes on you every 3 nanoseconds? Okay. In fact, to not change is more risky than changing, right? And so we've got this whole paradigm out there that has taught people to avoid pain, to avoid risk, to conform. I mean, the whole world of benchmarking is based on copying what other people do, as opposed to stepping out and creating something unique for yourself, because that might take a risk. So it's a tough issue to deal with. And it's going to be a long process to get people feeling comfortable with doing things differently. I mean, this is not something, I mean, I've been at this, right, for 40 years. And I have to tell you, I mean, one of my disappointments is that the yardstick, right, has not moved very, very far, to be honest. And one of the reasons is education teaches conformity and compliance and application of rules. They don't teach risk taking the way you and I are talking about it right now. In fact, what they try and do is apply a formula to new idea generation, et cetera, et cetera. What they don't teach is how you do stuff on the run, follow your gut, be imperfect, be okay with that, learn from it, and move on. They don't teach that. And one of the reasons is very few people who actually author books have actually run a business. So they have no basis for, or experience for teaching people about risk. If you're in the hot breath of competition as an entrepreneur in a startup, you know, okay, the pressure you're facing. And you also know that if you don't meet that pressure successfully by taking risk, you'll be dead. I mean, just look at the mortality rate of a new business, right? Like how many of them actually survive? What percentage survives the first 3 years? Very, very small. And so the stakes are high to not take risks. The stakes are high to not be different. And that's the kind of quote battle that I've been facing for a number of years in having conversations like this, and hopefully trying to spread the word that it's okay to be uncomfortable. I mean, discomfort, quite honestly, is a source of innovation. I mean, if you're comfortable, you don't have any need or any drive to be innovative, do you? You just keep doing what you're doing. But if you're uncomfortable, if you're at risk, if you're uncertain, boy, that is a powerful motivator to step out and do things differently. And people, we need to talk more about that in groups and in society. I mean, can you imagine the power and the economic benefits, just to think about it, of if we could take 1% of the business world and shift them, okay, over to pursuing different things that people care about? Can you imagine the economic power that would unleash in the marketplace? I mean, it would be such a different world. And I guess my hope is try and make a little bit of a contribution to help shift the needle that way, just a little bit.
So it's close to like being innovative too.
Well, I mean, being different is all about innovation. And the interesting thing to me is there are so many things out there that are counter to that. Like just look at benchmarking as an example, right? Finding who's best in class and then copying them. Some people will actually describe their activities that way as being innovative, which is being intellectually dishonest, because it's not being, how can you copy anything and claim that you're being innovative? And yet, I mean, the concept and the practice of benchmarking pervades every organization. It's literally, I mean, go out and gargle Google, okay? Go to Google, Google who's doing this, figure out who's best in class and copy them. Well, that destroys innovation, destroys it. There's one thing to learn about what's going on out there. And if you want to use Google to find that out, that's one thing. But to actually apply that in your own business or in your own life, thinking that you're going to get miraculous results, is crazy. There's no substitute for trying to figure out different ways of satisfying with what people care about. And we always have got to be motivated that way, as opposed to, adopting the latest fad like blue oceans or benchmarking and all that kind of stuff, which feeds the intellect, unfortunately doesn't drive results.
Do you have some examples of individuals, entrepreneurs, or companies that went in that direction of being different?
Well, I mean, I think there are a few around. There's no question, but they end up to be at the tail end of the normal distribution, right? They end up to be crazy. I mean, I just think about Steve Jobs for a moment. There's never, ever going to be another Steve Jobs. He just had this ability to visualize and act. Okay. But he always talked about the crazy ones. If you read some of his stuff, people say, well, how'd you do it? And he writes this piece called Here's to the Crazy Ones, right? And he honors people, right? It particularly driven by his own experience, who did crazy things, who did things not just outside of the box, but in a new box. Particularly if you consider the product innovation that they've had. That's on a very large scale. On a smaller scale, and this is one you probably won't even remember this. This goes back to the 60s, before we even had internet, before we even had social media. There's a rock band out there called the Grateful Dead. You probably never heard of them. They were a rock band in the 60s, as I say, well before social media, etc. They had a guitar player by the name of Jerry Garcia. Now, Jerry Garcia happened to be an amazing guitar player, but he also happened to be an amazing businessman. Now, there's a book out there called The Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. I would urge you and your listeners to find it and read it, because what it does is describe the simple things that Garcia did, okay, to actually make his band the most successful touring band in history. It wasn't any of the bands that you would normally think of. It was the Grateful Dead. And one of the things that he did is he would look at where the music industry was going, and he just did a 180. Let me give you an example. In those days, copyright was really, really important. I mean, people didn't want to share their music, right? They didn't want to have people recording their music because they didn't want to lose control. Can you imagine in today's world where we, actually encourage sharing of everything? But Garcia in the day figured that that was a silly notion. So he went against that. And they openly shared all their music. In fact, what they did is they would build a bandstand with recording equipment so their fans could come in and record their music. Everybody thought he was crazy. How could you do this? Aren't you worried about your copyright? And he reasoned that no, the right thing to do was to share his music, because if he did, they would probably see an increase in sales of records. And that's exactly what happened. Right. So there's an example of somebody having the foresight to take a huge risk, step out, do something different, and reap the benefits. Garcia himself was a mastermind at this. He always thought of doing business with his band in a way that people would just go, "Oh my goodness, what are they up to?" Right? He just had that natural ability. I think one of the challenges we have in organizations worldwide is we have leaders that are practicing leadership as opposed to practicing what you and I are just talking about. In other words, they're trying to be textbook leaders as opposed to people that can stimulate innovation and creativity, empower people to make mistakes, be okay with being imperfect. That kind of a leader is few and far between. And you know what? I could probably give you maybe 10 examples, but I mean, there's not a whole bunch that come to mind. Lady Gaga, by the way, is another one, right? Lady Gaga is a leader in her world. She does things differently. She's extremely powerful, extremely credible. She's fan-centric. She's amazing. She is amazing. She's a mentor for me when I just look at what she does, how she manages risk, how she deals with her fans, how she uses social media. She's amazing. There's a couple of examples.
So what have you learned in your journey, like concerning that being different and doing new things? What have you learned?
I've learned that, first of all, it's really hard work. I mean, if you don't have being different running through your veins, literally running through your veins, it's going to be a really hard journey for you. Okay, because unless it's running through your veins, you won't have the tenacity, you won't have the perseverance, you won't have the tolerance for pain that's needed to drive this notion forward. Okay, and that's because the inertia in the world to protect compliance is so strong. To break away from that just requires you to be extraordinary. And I don't mean that in a narcissistic way. Extraordinary in terms of the amount of energy. I mean, hell, you got to learn that pain is a strategic concept, okay? I learned that a long time ago. Because if you want to move this forward, you have to be able to tolerate pain, because nobody wants you to succeed. You're viewed as a threat because you're doing things differently. You're introducing silly notions, they call it. How could you do this? Because it doesn't conform with a textbook. So you're fighting all of that sort of attitude. And if I learned that if I was going to, if this were going to be successful, okay, I was going to have to work harder, work longer, try to muster an army of advocates around the ideas, and that's important. And that if that didn't happen, the concept would die, because quite frankly, there's nobody out there right now talking about what you and I are talking about. Nobody. We're on our own.
What are some mistakes you see that businesses do or entrepreneurs do?
Yeah. So, well, one of the big ones is everybody's relying on the textbook. Everybody's relying on what academics and theoreticians say is the right thing to do for business, is the right thing to do for leaders. And I write a lot about and talk a lot about putting the textbook down. I'm happy that you have an education. Good for you. That's important. But now you got to move on and consider that there's some other things that you need to do to leverage that into success. And of course, it's what you and I are talking about, because, universities don't talk about what you and I are talking about. They don't talk about the only statement. They don't talk about claptrap differentiation. They talk about universal selling propositions, which quite frankly is a joke, because they're not selling propositions. They're another way to mask, mass market thinking and the lack of differentiation. Okay. And so yeah, we've got to get people moving from the textbook, right, into thinking about things and being comfortable with things that are completely out of scope from that. And that's hard because we've been taught not to do that. Right? Like I can remember my mother telling me, Roy, if your teacher ever sends a note home saying that you've done something that is different, she didn't use the word different, but have drawn attention to yourself, etc., then you're going to be in deep trouble. Well, it's hard to step out of the mold and do things differently in that sort of an environment, right? And if you think about businesses, I mean, there's a lot of businesses that actually punish people, right, for stepping out and failing, right, and doing things imperfectly, whatever that definition of perfection is. And so we've just got a major challenge in front of us, and I hope through conversations like this we can make a slight bit of difference.
So, what advice would you have for people stepping in that direction?
Well, I think it's from a business point of view and a career point of view. The first thing you really have to do is get really clear on what you want to be when you grow up.
You were talking about, like, for businesses and professionals, the advice that you were going to give.
Yeah. So the basic challenge that people have and organizations have is to differentiate themselves. It's kind of like the theme that we've been talking about this whole podcast. And so my advice would be figure out, first of all, what the people that you're trying to serve care about, and then try and figure out how you uniquely can satisfy what they care about. That's where to start. Because if you're looking for a new business, if you're not different than everybody else in the space, you're going to be dead. There's just no question about it. Okay. You have to figure that out. So the world of differentiation is still there for people to be successful in and to figure it out. And that's where to start. If you haven't figured that out, then stop. Okay. Until you do figure it out. I know that I mentor a lot of young professional CEOs who just, in the startup business. And I say to them after we had a conversation, and it's obvious to me that they're the same, they don't have a unique product or service, blah, blah, blah. And I tell them, stop spending the money. Okay. Figure out what makes you special in a way people care about before you take one step. That's what I would say to them.
I guess reinventing yourself too has a part of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and your business. I mean, one of the things that we get into when we look at creating an only statement is that clients have got to reframe their business, and as individuals, we have to reframe ourselves too. Let me give you an example. If you're really good at doing something that nobody cares about, then you have to reframe that, right? Because you're not going to be very successful trying to flog something that nobody cares about. And that's an example. It happens all the time. And it's an example of somebody who hasn't done the work of defining who their target is, figuring out what they care about, and then creating the ability uniquely to play into that. And so it starts there, and it needs to be done completely. There's no way to avoid it. It's hard work, but it has to be done.
Mm-hmm. What are some stuff?
I mean, one of the examples I'll give you is what I do is all about how to. And so if you look at what I do, I'm the only one that does this. It's not a theoretical treatise on differentiation. It's how to do it. And so it's a roadmap of how to do it that is backed up with the achievement of $1 billion a year in revenue. Nobody else can do that. Nobody else does that. They either pick the pontification route and talk about theory or something else, but nobody else puts the proposition forward that I put. And that it's not by accident, it's by design.
What are some stuff that you're working right now at the moment?
I'm doing a lot of podcasts. I think this is probably well into my 75th, almost 80 podcasts over the last 11 months, trying to talk about my work, and specifically because I published my 7th book about 10 months ago, called Be Different or Be Dead, the Audacious Unheard-of Ways I Took a Startup to $1 billion in Sales. And so I really enjoy conversations like this because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the things that worked for me, and hopefully others would be excited by the ideas and try them for themselves. So I'm doing an awful lot of that. I'm doing seminars. I do work for not-for-profits because they have the same differentiation issues as a normal business would have, right? Why would you donate to this organization versus another? So the differentiation piece is basically pervades careers, not-for-profits, small business, medium business, large business. It's out there. And so I try and work with people to share what worked for me and hopefully help them.
You said some what worked for you, as there's been stuff that didn't work for you?
Oh, all sorts of stuff. I mean, you got 16 hours to talk about. I mean, the reality is, success doesn't come with a silver bullet. It comes by doing what we've talked about this whole hour, which is practicing imperfection and trying things. I mean, I've tried things in terms of ways to be different that haven't worked because I misread what people cared about. Thought they cared about red wine and they loved white wine, stuff like that. It's just like, it's just the journey has all of these failings in it. And that's what makes the journey exciting. If you learn from them and do it and just keep moving the yardsticks forward, it's like, okay, I tried that, didn't work. What next? Okay, I tried that, didn't work. What's next? What I tried to do is not make the same mistake twice. That's what I tried to do. And hopefully that worked out.
And what if you reach a dead end?
Pardon me?
What if you reach a dead end? You don't know where to go after.
Well, see, that's the pain, right? That's the pain we talked about before, right? You reach a dead end, you say it's not a dead end. Okay, what are the implications of where I am, and where can they lead me? And it's like you take a deep breath, Richard. You take a deep breath, you suck it back, and you say, okay, got that. Now where do I go? And that's the nature of the journey. If you didn't have this stuff part of your DNA, it's hard to do that. If all you have is a textbook, you will never do that. You will hit the dead end and go, oh my God, it's over. Go find another book to inform what you should do. And the problem with that is that never works.
Where can people find you on social media or the internet?
Sure. I've got a website, bedifferentorbedead.com. And I've been blogging since 2009. So there's a lot of content on my stuff there, and you can visit me there, and my books are on there as well. Plus, you can always send me an email, roy.osing@gmail.com. And I'm happy to have a conversation with people. I mean, I engage quite often. People will send me their draft only statements, for example, and we talk about that, and we talk about some of the concepts, and they want more clarification, etc. On social media, if you just Google me on Roy Osing, you'll get all the stuff. I'm on all of the major social media platforms, and try and get as much as my content as I can out using those platforms as well. So I'm there.
Okay. Thanks, Roy, for being on the podcast, despite the technical difficulties. My apologies, but we got through it. Yeah, so thanks a lot. It was nice meeting you and talking to you. I hope people found value in that episode. So it's uh it's a kind of different episode. So I hope people enjoyed it. On that note, thank you everybody for taking the time to listen to the podcast. Welcome to A Better Lifestyle. My name is Richard L'Esperance. I was with Roy Osing, and we'll see you on the next episode, everybody. Goodbye. Thanks.